we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday evening with me here in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. I didn't realize this offhand, usually good with dates such as these, but it slipped my mind until going onto Instagram earlier and realizing that today is an anniversary, a very important anniversary in the history of boxing. Because on this day, 1981, what is generally regarded to be a top 5 greatest fights ever. And when we say something as amorphous as greatest this, greatest that, best, worst, it's subjective. Some of the subjectivity, though, will be agreed upon by almost everyone. It should be pointed out. But these sorts of things are entirely subjective. But most fight fans, most fans of boxing, will say that the first fight between Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns is one of the greatest fights they've ever seen, one of the greatest fights ever, period. And that fight took place at Caesar's Palace, September 16th, 1981, 43 years ago today. Now, as a historian of boxing, when we talk about best, greatest, when in this sport, generally speaking, it will be a fight where we know both fighters. Ideally, and what I'm going to say here fits this, it's all-timers squaring off. It's acknowledged greats, even if we don't know at the time that they are going to have that level of career. But all-time greats, usually near their prime, or there's something else, and they fight and make magic. Brutal magic, but magic. So if I'm asked, what would I say, what are the 3 greatest fights? Off the top of my head, I'm going to say Ali Frazier 3, the Thriller in Manila. Hagler Hearns, 1985, Marvin Hagler, Thomas Hearns, and Ray Leonard versus Thomas Hearns. So the 3 that would come off the top of my head, Thomas Hearns is involved in 2 of them and lost them both. It's easy to kind of underrate just how fucking lethal Thomas Hearns was in the ring because he lost those 2 fights. Sometimes it's just not your night, or other times the other guy had a certain magic. Or in the case of Marvin Hagler, it was a nightmarish matchup, and middleweight was not Hearns' most effective fighting weight. That's the danger when you keep moving up weight classes. You might reach a weight class where your punches don't have the same effect. And Hearns landed some shots on Hagler in that fight. There aren't too many welterweights that would have been walking through him, and although he kind of busted Hagler up, there were shots, the same shots that almost knocked Roberto Duran unconscious. Marvin just got mean. He just got angry. But that's beside the point. We're talking about all-time iconic, legendary fights. And Ray Leonard versus Thomas Hearns, unfortunately, or maybe unfortunately is the wrong word, because for the sake of health, maybe it's the wrong word, but it is one of the final fights, and there might be historians that will come up with a better one, but one of the last fights between all-time greats, as Hearns and Leonard are 2 of the 4 kings, the other 2 being the aforementioned Marvin Hagler and the great Roberto Duran. But Leonard versus Hearns is maybe the last fight where if a fight had ended in 12 rounds, as 12 rounds is now the maximum, if the fight had ended after 12, Thomas Hearns wins a decision. And he wins it comfortably. He was ahead probably 5 points, 4 points, 3 points. He was not going to, it was almost impossible for Leonard to win a decision after round 12. Now, the way that round 13 and then round 14 unfolded, Ray would have had a shot if it had continued in the same path, but that's also not really the point here. Ali Frazier 3 went 14. The sad thing, or the incredible thing, it's all a matter of how you look at it when you're talking about a sport as brutal as boxing. If Ali Frazier 3 is a 12-round fight, as the second one was, the first fight with Ali and Frazier was 15. It went the distance. I think Frazier would have won a decision if it had been a 12-rounder. I'm pretty sure that he would have won the decision. But it went 15, and Frazier scoring a knockdown in the final round. When they went to the cards, people knew Frazier was going to win. Ali could have, maybe he won 7 or 8 rounds, but the knockdown pretty much sealed it in everybody's eyes. So that was like a not comfortable, but it was a decision that everybody knew was coming, and there really weren't too many people saying, oh, Ali got robbed. Maybe he could have won 9 rounds on one judge's scorecard, but that was a just situation. That fight would have been the same if it was 12 rounds or 15. Joe takes the decision. I think that he probably would have been up 7-5 after 12. It was a tough fight. Ali had his moments. Joe had, be hospitalized. He got beat up. They both got beat up. Leonard Hearns, after 12, Leonard is losing. His eye is not busted up, but he's got a big swollen mouse under the eye. Doesn't necessarily look as tired as Hearns, but Tommy, he had that long range. He had that jab. It was tough for Ray to get inside. And Ray is a great boxer, but he just kind of went away from some of his strengths in that fight, because there are stretches in that fight where Leonard is really kicking the shit out of Hearns, and Hearns is wobbly at various points in the first half of the fight. And I don't know what, sometimes you watch a fighter and you don't really understand what they're doing, but maybe the eye was bothering him. But after 12 rounds in that particular fight, Leonard went back to his corner, and Hearns had won the previous 4 rounds on all 3 scorecards. So Ray went from presumably leading after 7, after 8. And it's not like he was getting beaten out of sight. He just was not boxing effectively. He was stalking Hearns, and Hearns was keeping distance with the jab. And he was just outboxing him. Sometimes it's not a matter of beating the shit out of the guy or busting a guy up or knocking a guy unconscious. Sometimes it's just a matter of keeping distance, hitting, and neutralizing your opponent's strengths. And that's what Thomas Hearns was doing through 12 rounds, now the maximum. And what I was saying with the Ali and Frazier, the first fight went 15. The second went the distance, but it was only a 12-rounder. And the third one ended after 14. But the idea with Ali Frazier 3, this is what I'm sorry, I again, too many colliding thoughts in my head, But in Ali Frazier 3, Ali would have won if it had been after 12. He certainly was winning on points on all 3 cards. The brutality, the max pain, the horror of Ali Frazier 3, and why it is considered a top 3 greatest fight ever. A big part of it is the 13th and 14th round. Even though Ali was winning, both guys, the sense was this was going to be the last time they fought. Neither guy should have been out there. They both should have already been retired by that point. The 6 minutes of rounds 13 and 14 did permanent damage to both men. Even though Ali didn't really get hit, he got hit enough. Frazier was just getting plastered. Both of his eyes were swollen shut. He couldn't see. This sort of thing is less likely to happen in 12 than in 15, on top of everything else. Frazier's mouthpiece goes flying across the ring in round 13. The fight was stopped after 14 because Frazier's trainer thought the guy could die out there. Kid, nobody will forget what you did out here today. Well, after 12 rounds at Caesar's Palace, speaking of Ali, his trainer, his chief second, Angelo Dundee, also worked with Ray Leonard. And about 6 years after Ali, an exhausted Muhammad Ali, went back to his corner after round 14 in Manila, having beaten the crap out of Frazier and just nailing him right, left, couldn't knock him down. Frazier wasn't going down. After the 14th round, Ali just staggered back to his corner. How was he even going to continue? And they stopped the fight. Frazier's corner. 6 years later, Leonard walked back to his corner after 12, looking like he knew he was going to lose the fight. And Angelo Dundee didn't really do this with Ali, but Angelo Dundee, with the mics on, the kind of, it wasn't pay-per-view, there was no pay-per-view, they called it closed circuit. People would go to venues like Madison Square Garden or Nassau Coliseum or the LA Forum or whatever it is, and they would pay, and they would be in the sports arena. They'd get food, they'd schmooze, they could, if there was a luxury, whatever it is. And they would just watch the fight on a simulcast. It's actually the technology for like early 70s when they did it in the first Ali Frazier fight, although it didn't work the way they expected it. But it was actually pretty cool tech. But in this instance, you heard what Angelo Dundee in real time was saying. And when Leonard got back to his corner, his eye is, really swollen. He goes, "You're blowing it now, son. You're blowing it." And he was telling his fighter, "Ray, you're going to lose this fight." He doesn't need to say the rest of it, which is, this is a winnable fight. I don't know what you're doing out there, but you had him hurt at any number of times. Emmanuel Stewart, Hearns' trainer, was actually screaming at him early in the fight, "Bro, if you don't start throwing punches, I'm going to stop the fight." Like, it was that bad for Hearns at various points. And then he regrouped. So whatever magic Ray Leonard possessed, and Ray Leonard is, one of my favorite fighters, even though his prime was way before when I was even old enough to understand. I saw a tape delay the next night of Leonard Hearns, and up to that point in my life, I think was I 7? It was the greatest fight by far I'd ever seen. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. But whatever special magic Ray Leonard possessed, something clicked when he got up for the 13th round. And he went out there almost invigorated, but he went out there with a different look on his face, like, you know what? I've got 3 rounds left. Because nowadays, Ray would have lost a decision, and it would have seemed like, what the hell did he do? Ray was winning the fight. He just kind of stopped throwing punches. He stopped boxing. He started trying to throw home run bombs on this guy. That's not really his best fight. Yeah, Ray can brawl, but he's a master boxer. The guy's footwork is absurd. It's so good. So Ray went out in the 13th round, and he was still stalking, but he had a different look. He looked hungry. He looked like a guy who was going to find an opening. And he landed a big right. And with the one punch, in one shot, he altered the trajectory, not only of the fight, but he altered the trajectory of his career and Hearns' career. And so he followed up, and he just landed a blizzard of punches. And a referee, Davey Pearl, you could kind of take issue. He made a couple of what I would look, it's easy for me to say, I'm not a ref, but he made a couple of what appear to be mistakes in that round. And one of them was Hearns went down, and even though he didn't actually go down specifically from a punch, he went down from like an accumulation, and he kind of got tangled up in the ropes. And Davey Pearl, the first time that happened, I don't believe he called it a knockdown. Then later in the round, Hearns rolled back and forth, and he went into the ropes again, and Pearl's instinct was also to say that it wasn't a knockdown, but then he kind of changed his mind, if memory serves. And so Leonard, out of nowhere, in round 13, he scored a 10-8 round. And they didn't know what the scorecards were saying at the time. They don't show the cards during the fight, except on rare occasions. And one of those occasions, another Ali fight, when Ali fought Ernie Shavers in Madison Square Garden in 77, there had been so much, stop me if you've heard this before, there had been so much in the way of controversial decisions where the fans were angry. They didn't understand what were the guys scoring round to round, what's happening. Ali fought Ernie Shavers, world heavyweight title fight in 1977 at MSG. ABC actually showed the scores every round. I don't know how they were cleared to do that, but it was unbelievable, because Ali in that fight, man, did he take a beating. It was the worst beating he ever took, even though he won the fight. He took more sustained punishment that night, even than Frazier in the first fight, I would argue. But after 14 rounds, Ali had an insurmountable lead. And the announcers even said that Ken Norton is Ali's old rival and future frenemy. Well, no, they ended up becoming friends. I shouldn't even say that. But Norton, they were saying, If the champ doesn't get knocked out, he wins the fight. There's no ifs. Even if he get a 10-7 round, which doesn't really happen, he just has to stay on his feet. And everybody watching on TV, they already knew what was, yeah. If he lasted the final bell, there's no suspense. We know who won because we're looking at the scorecards. But in Leonard Hearns, no one knew how far down Ray Leonard was, because there are plenty of people to this day, they look at the scoring after 12 and they say, well, that scoring isn't correct. They have Hearns like this was a cakewalk. This is a much closer fight than that. I feel like the judges, because Leonard already had one loss and Hearns was undefeated, Leonard had lost a tough fight to Roberto Duran in the previous year, 1980, but then he won the rematch, the famous No Mas fight, where Duran had a stomach issue and he kind of quit in the middle of the 8th round, or just didn't want to, continue. He was getting beaten. He was sort of getting humiliated. It's hard to blame him, but unfortunately, No Mas, people really gave Duran a lot of shit for that. But most people would say that Hearns was only up by a couple of points, maybe 2 points, 1 or 2 after the 10-8 round for Leonard. But according to the scorecards, he was up by 4 points on one card, 3 points on another, and I believe he was still up by 2 on another. So Ray Leonard was going to have another 10-8 round just to put himself in position where he would have a chance. Now, he didn't know any of that, but what he knew was, Tommy's hurt, he's tired, he's hurt, and I've got 6 minutes. And Ray went out there in the 14th, and he was dominating the action. There really wasn't that much going on in the first minute. And then Ray landed a kind of a windmill. It was almost a George Foreman sort of a punch. And what I mean by that is Foreman threw these sort of weird roundhouses. He threw these punches. And it's not that George didn't know how to punch, but Ali used to joke around with George. He called it the anywhere punch. Yeah, George, throw that anywhere punch. Where he would throw punches that, from a technical standpoint, what the hell's he doing? Didn't anybody teach this guy how to punch? Yeah. But he would just move his arm, and if he hit you, he hurt you. Anywhere it hits you, it hurts you. So Leonard threw this kind of long right cross. It almost was one of these, but it was a big windup and a big shot, and it caught Hearns. It was the sort of punch that probably didn't hurt, but it spun his head around, and it probably temporarily blacked him out. And that's when you can get the guy, when there's a couple of seconds where, the synapses are not connecting properly because it stuns the brain, the whole thing. So Leonard was all over Hearns, and he was just landing. And finally, Davey Pearl had enough and stopped the fight. And that was it. So it's technically a TKO in the 14th round. And when it was over, there were some people, and the late great Don Dunphy, who announced and and broadcast so many of the famous fights going back to the Joe Louis era. He was behind the microphone when Ali fought Frazier. He was behind the mic in Manila. He was a great announcer. But Don Dunphy couldn't believe that Pearl was stopping the fight because the sense was that Hearns was winning. But in the moment, I think it was a good stoppage. And Gil Clancy, who was doing the commentary also, he felt that it was a really good stoppage, that it was time. There wasn't any reason to continue, because at that moment, there was no way that he was even going to survive the 14th round. He was getting just blasted. And then you're going to go another round. It might not seem like much, but it is such a brutal sport. And you look at fighters who got out at the right time, such as Lennox Lewis. And Lennox Lewis, in his great career, he only had 2 losses. And in both of those, he lost pretty much because of one hellacious punch, as opposed to 15 rounds of a guy beating on you, landing a ton of hellacious punches. Not every punch with the same force does the same damage. When you look at Lennox, he looks great. He seems to be the picture of health. And even George Foreman seems to be the picture of health. He took a hell of a lot of beatings in his career, although he gave a lot more than he took, that's for sure. But the idea is, it's the accumulation of blows before the brain has a chance to heal. And in this case, another 4 minutes of Ray Leonard's barrages on Thomas Hearns. It could have done, you don't want to say it could have killed him, but it would have done incalculable damage to him. There wasn't any reason, there was no realistic way that he was going to win the fight. And you don't ever want a situation where a guy is just getting annihilated in the last 3 rounds and say, oh, well, he won a decision. It's not worth it. It's not worth it, especially given how young these guys were at the time. Hearns was probably in his mid-20s. Ray was in his mid-20s. You don't want it to come to that. And the reason why the 15 round, or one of the reasons why they stopped having 15 round fights was the Ray Mancini Dooku Kim fight, which I think it was in the 13th round that Kim he lost and he ended up dying. It was just an attempt to take this barbaric sport and make it a little bit more tolerable. And certainly there's a lot of debate, and this is not a debate that I'm part of, but a lot of debate between what's more dangerous, boxing or MMA. Well, MMA is more dangerous in the moment, because if you do a certain kind of chokehold, you theoretically could kill somebody in that moment. And the breaking of bones and everything like that. You see guys with their feet snapping and an elbow snapping. But some of the purveyors of MMA, and Daniel Cormier and some others have talked about this. He said the thing with MMA is that if you get hit, the fight could be over. And yeah, it's no good to get hit with a fucking knee to the head. But you're not getting hit again. Fight's over. You're concussed. Fight's over. And your brain is not taking any more poundings. It's not taking any more damage until it has time to heal. And that's the difference with boxing. It's not one big shot that is going to leave permanent damage very often. It is the accumulation of being hit and hit and hit and hit with incredible concussive force for 45 minutes to an hour. Even reducing from 15 rounds to 12, it takes away 20% more blows that could be landed. In the case of the 3 fights I mentioned, the Thomas Hearns Marvin Hagler fight was over in 3 rounds. That is the greatest action fight in boxing history. I will go down on that hill. Very few people, there are people that might come up with other ones. They'll say, well, Corrales, Castillo, it's fine. But nobody will say that that is not an incredible action fight. The closest approximation to a Rocky movie, as far as, because I used to joke with the Rocky movies, every single punch is a home run bomb. Every punch is Mike Tyson's Sunday punch, from his prime, where they are just winging and swinging. There was very little boxing. It was a street fight. And they were just throwing bombs at each other. So that's a totally different animal. That fight was set for 15 rounds. It didn't get there. It was over in 3. But the other 2, Ali and Frazier, the extraordinary 13th and 14th rounds, and there's a moment in the 14th. It's sad. Both guys are gone now. They both died probably younger than they would have because of terrible nights like that, where they had such incredible courage and will and the need to one up the other. They were fighting for the championship of each other as much as the heavyweight championship. But there's a moment it might have been the 13th, I'm not sure, but there's a moment where Ali lands a shot and Frazier staggers back. It looks like he might drop, but he doesn't. And when Ali sees that he's not dropping, he has a look on his face that I have never seen in any other fight that he was involved in. It is a look of almost pure exhaustion. And not just the physical exhaustion, but the mental exhaustion of, this motherfucker won't go down. So he gives this look and he goes over and he lands about 15 more punches before the round ends. And it is artistically beautiful, and it is terrible at the same time. Hearns Leonard, unless you object to the brutality of boxing, it's just a great fight. It has the ebb and flow of the Ali Frazier fights. All 3 of the Ali Frazier fights had moments where, Ali is totally in command, and then Frazier, Ali's fucked, Frazier's got him. In all 3 fights. Hearns Leonard had, Ray started strong, then he seemed to slip a little bit, and then Leonard came on again, and then Hearns just seemed to take over. It is an extraordinary fight, and if somebody says this is the single greatest fight in the history of professional boxing, I wouldn't even take issue with that, because it is purely subjective. But if you watch the fight, somebody who doesn't know anything about great fights, a kind of new boxing fan, if they watch Ali Frazier 3, if they watch Hagler Hearns, and they watch Leonard Hearns, 1981, they'll say, that was incredible. Nobody's going to watch this fight and say, yeah, it wasn't all I hoped for. Just as anyone watching Hagler Hearns, no one's going to say, yeah, it wasn't really that much action. When it's literally 7.5 minutes of these two all-time greats savaging one another and giving everything they've got, laying it all out there. And Tommy Hearns wouldn't have wanted the ref to stop the fight, but sometimes you have to get in there. You have to protect the fight. And I hate to say it, but given what we know of the lasting damage that fighters can accrue, you'd rather the ref stop the fight a few punches too soon than too late. Benny Kid Paret, Emil Griffith, Ruby Goldstein should have gotten in there. He should have gotten in there. He just didn't. And then there was the Mitch Halpern, the Ruelas Garcia fight, not that long before Tyson and Holyfield. You can never be too careful. It is a brutal sport, and they're all competitors, and they all want to go out on their shield, as they say. Davy Pearl stepping in the 14th round was the right decision. Look, you can look it up right now. There's some fantastic quality, high definition of this now 43-year-old recording, freely available on YouTube. Sugar Ray Leonard versus Thomas Hearns, easily, in my opinion, top 3 greatest professional boxing matches in the history of the sport. 43 years ago today, September 16, 1981, 2 of the greats, 2 of the 4 kings, Hagler, Duran, but the other 2, Thomas Hearns and Sugar Ray Leonard, fought an incredible brawl for 14 rounds at Caesar's Palace on this day, 1981. This has been episode 307 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday evening with me here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,